Hello. Today I want to talk about the topic of emotions and moving through really intense emotions. And I wanted to, remind you of some things that can assist with moving through emotions. Now, disclaimer here before I get any further, I'm not a medical practitioner. I just want to remind you it's your responsibility to look after yourself and the actions that you take in regards to doing that and the support that you seek. So again, these are just some rememberings. You can use what resonates with you, and what doesn't, you don't have to use it. As simple as that. So emotions, right? We know emotions are energy in motion, and they just need to be moved through. Trying to control them, trying to repress them. I'm sure you're well aware now that that is not necessarily the way forward. When you're trying to control and repress emotions, they then can become lodged within the body, which can then cause, say, disease and illness later. So it's really important that we try and move through them as they arise. I'm also aware that some of you are, living lives maybe in this moment where as an emotion arises, it may not always be very easy for you to be able to move through it. You may not be able to create the space that you actually feel you need to be able to move through it. Maybe you're, you've got kids, you're presenting something, in front of an audience of thousands of people, all these different things. Like, I understand, sometimes you feel like you might need a few hours to move through something, and you're in the middle of a work meeting. So I get it. I understand that, and it's not the space that you feel is required is not always there. However, if you can give yourself even a few moments, or if you do have that space that you feel that you need much longer to do it, then these practices can be really helpful. And obviously what I'm expressing here is moving through intense emotions that we may associate as being quite uncomfortable. When we associate an emotion of something like joy, excitement, we may not feel that that's an uncomfortable emotion. Some people may, and sure, you can still use these practices. But for some of us, we can be very welcoming of those kind of emotions, depending on the place that we feel that we're in. But it's more these practices, I guess, I'm sharing them in regards to the emotions that you feel very uncomfortable to feel, and you're not always very welcoming of them. And it's some of these things you can do on your own. Actually, many of these things you can do on your own. Some of them you may feel that you may need support. You may need someone with you, someone who's actually certified, or someone who's very well embodied in these practices. That can be encouraged too if that's available to you, and you feel like that person can really support you through what you're moving through. And, doing these practices with the intention of just moving through the emotion. You're not doing it to avoid the emotion. Again, you're not trying to control it. You're not trying to repress it. You're not trying to have an emotion about the emotion, or otherwise sometimes call it a judgment about the emotion, and even a judgment about the emotion. And, and if it comes up, okay, it's there, but we don't have to attach to it. And that's often where the issues can arise. And even if you notice yourself attaching to it, just noticing yourself attaching to it and not trying to judge the fact that that you're attaching to it. So all of that, anyway, it's all just for little reminders. So I'm going to get into some of the rememberings that may help. So first one I want to touch on is really focusing around like movement of the body. So, if you're into things like boxing, running, dancing, anything that involves actually moving the body can assist with getting the emotion, I guess, move through the body and getting it out of the body. And again, it's doing it with this intention of just moving it through the body. And if you find, you're not into running, Don't force yourself to go for a run to move through it. So find a movement that you actually really enjoy if you feel like that is how you want to move through the emotion. Another one is sort of around, I guess, a lot of the vocal box, and that is things like, if you can, screaming, singing, talking it through. A little disclaimer with that one though is sometimes the talking process can kind of get us a little bit too focused in the mind, whereas obviously emotion is not necessarily in the mind. So careful with that one, but if you find it's a very helpful tool for you, do use it. But also things like humming, journaling as well. I know you're not really necessarily using your voice box, but it's words. But it could also be in regards to something like art. So things like painting, drawing, and almost anything could be considered an art. I do get that. Oh, and something I wanted to mention in regards to the voice box, laughing can be a really good way to move through as well. So yeah, art, again, can be, like I said, anything can be considered art. Even doing the dishes could be considered an art. So, it's up to you. Obviously, not forcing yourself to do an artistic expression that you don't enjoy, but something that you maybe do enjoy, or that you do often, or something that you know that you enjoyed as a child. So tapping into that can help with moving through. Like I touched on doing the dishes before, but, things like cooking, gardening, cleaning. Again, you may want to be like careful in regards to cooking and with gardening, because cooking you can be putting in like particular energy into your food, but you don't have to look at it in that way. It's same with gardening. If you're planting seeds, like what kind of intentions are you putting in the ground? But it doesn't have to be planting seeds. You could be doing some other sort of gardening activities, which obviously can be associated with what I talked about before, with movement. You're moving your body, pulling the weeds out, you're mowing the lawns, whatever it is. So that can also assist. I just want to remind you also, with these activities, you're doing them with the intention of moving through the emotion. It's not to actually try and cause a distraction of what it is that you're going through. If you're finding that it's actually causing a distraction with what you're going through and the emotion you're moving through, then it may not actually be as much of a medicine as what another practice could be for you. Another thing I want to talk about is breath. If you know particular breath practices that are very helpful for moving through emotions, my favorite one is what some call the alternative nostril breathing. It's very good for the parasympathetic nervous system, because it's very good for sort of like calming it and then just allowing what needs to move through. And it's literally just getting your thumb, breathing in with one nostril, holding it with both fingers on your nose, and then letting the thumb go and breathing back out, and then holding it again. And it's just moving through that motion, basically. And there's a particular amount of seconds you can hold for each of those. Go look up on the internet if you're not sure, or don't really know what I'm talking about. You can look more further into that. And also other sensory sort of things, like just noticing, like, oh, what can I smell right now? What can I see right now? What can I feel in my body? So that's also another practice. Now, water. Now, the reason I'm bringing up the element of water is because in many cultures, it's often associated with emotions and moving emotions. So, making sure obviously that you're hydrated, you're going through intense emotion, have you had some water? Good thing just to sort of like check in with yourself with that. But also, if you've got access to things like an ocean, a river, preferably moving water, because the emotion is, you want it to be moving, you want it to be moving through you. And moving water can help assist with moving the emotion through you. If you've only got access to a lake and still water, it's not the end of the world. But obviously moving water is probably more preferable. What is nature in general? Going for a walk outside, especially if you don't feel like you've had enough of that in your life of late, of recent. And another thing is sort of, coming back to another sensory thing is like touch, Are you giving yourself loving touch? Do you need a hug? Do you need to give yourself a hug? Things like tapping. There's other somatic practices as well. And so this is just a few of many of the things that we can use to help move through emotions. And I am aware that some people say the most important thing is just to sit there and breathe, and that's okay. But I know some of us are not always at that place, and it's not necessarily a terrible thing to do something else to help assist, where you're actually having to engage with your body in other ways to help the emotion move through. And obviously your post-movement practice and your integration, is going to look and feel different. And I'm not going to unpack that in this vlog. So let me know if you've got any practices that you feel that you want to share that maybe I haven't touched on down below. Maybe there's some ones that I have expressed and maybe there's something that you want to add to that. And I trust that what I've shared has been really helpful, and I will see you in the next vlog.